All right, so just as a reminder, that blood evidence on the knife showed the victim's blood was on the knife, but other blood was inconclusive. So she can't tell whether it was, the victim, the male victim, or if it was the defendant's blood on that knife. Let's bring in our guest still in with us this hour, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, great to see you. As always, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. And, from the beginning, prosecutors said, look, blood doesn't lie. This was part of their opening statement. It seemed to be where they were putting a lot of their cards in this case. Here's the blood expert. Very strong testimony on direct that she feels the scene was tampered with based on the blood. What do you make of the cross-examination this far?
I think the cross-examination thus far is what it has to be. They can't be too visceral, but at the end of the day, some of her stuff is inconclusive. So she's not really a bad witness she's not like the end of the case for the defense. I think that they are doing what they need to do, but I feel that she kind of gave them a nugget by saying it's inconclusive. At the end of the day, I don't think there's any dispute that the defense is going to say there's no dispute that certain people's blood was there, but the blood patterns, nothing shows that our client committed the murder, because the whole purpose is whether or not this was staged, not whether or not certain people died at the residence. So I think they're doing what they need to do. I think they're getting it ready for their closing statement to say what I just said.
Now, that was her claim on direct, Mike. She said, based on the blood evidence, the way the blood was flowing, et cetera, to her, it looked like it had been staged. Now, again, staged by whom? How? We don't necessarily know. It could just be a mistake. They're checking on the body, move the body. Who knows? How important is that testimony for the prosecution's case? Is it as strong as they say, as they claim? Blood doesn't lie.
I think it fits into their narrative. I think it's important, which is why I think the defense has to bring on their own expert to say this is a very imprecise science, and you can never know with any sort of reliability whether or not a scene was tampered with. So, yes, I think it's important for the prosecution, but I think the state can easily rebut this with some strategies.
Yeah, I would agree, which is why I'm sort of perplexed why the state would have put so much emphasis on it based on the testimony that I heard, right? Because that could hurt them ultimately with the jury. All right, Mike, stand by. We're going to take a break, folks. When we come back, of course, we're going to have more key testimony in the murder trial against Brendan Banfield. Keep it here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice. All right, let's bring back in our guest still with us, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, I tell you, I like the way this cross is going. They're accomplishing so much. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, people tell me all the time, hey, I want a pit bull attorney. And I tell them, you don't want a pit bull attorney. You want an attorney to perform exactly the way Brendan Banfield attorney performed right now, this cross-examination. He was flawless. He was perfect. And he also exposed something that us defense attorneys always want, which is when you see an expert refusing to concede a basic point or two or three, then the jury knows that they have an agenda. He did that. It was marvelous.
Yeah, I would have to agree. He also got her to admit that there were some things that she would have preferred be done that weren't done, which is important to their overall claim that, look, they didn't investigate this good enough for you to convict this guy and send him away for the rest of his life.
Yeah, he did, and it's exactly what it is. I don't know why the prosecution made such a big move to tell in their opening statements that this expert is going, they're going to demonstrate that this was tampered with. But I don't know. But he definitely they lobbed it up for the defense, and he just knocked it out of the park. Yeah,
and I suggested earlier, Mike, that might have been a problem. The fact that it seemed as though they were putting a lot of eggs in that blood basket, meaning the state. Yeah. And now hearing this particular witness, this expert, I think they've got, at least me questioning the efficacy or the completeness of her investigation and her conclusions. That could be problematic in the long run for the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Because this defense attorney is getting them thinking, because I agree with him. And he got me going. And imagine if I was actually in the courtroom, the jurors are in the courtroom with him sitting, no more than 10 feet away from where he's speaking. And so it would have made a big impact on them, because it made an impact on us here watching from home.
Again, strong conclusions on direct, but I think it's being undermined somewhat on cross here, right, Mike? I want you to stand by because you're going to be sticking around like that, of course. Folks, I want you to stick around as well, because coming up, we've reached the point where we can bring you that verdict in the Kevin West trial, as I mentioned, in Washington State. So we're going to have that for you at the top of the next hour, so don't go anywhere. Also ahead, our own Kelly Craft is standing by outside the courthouse in Virginia for an update on that au pair affair murder trial. All that and more coming up next. Keep it here. Court TV, your front row seat to justice. All right, so you see the defendant there pretty much looks like he's breaking into tears. You see him holding hand with a family member. Not sure if that was his sister or his mother. It looked like his mother, so he did take the stand in his defense. Again, he is facing life in prison without the possibility of parole, shaking his head, saying no, as if the jury got it wrong. Let's welcome back in our guest, still with us, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, quickly, your reaction to the verdict here in this case. And again, this was one of those cases where it reminded me a lot of the Brian Walsh case, right? Basically, he's saying he found his wife the way she was and that he had nothing to do with her death. Family members came in, testified on his behalf. He took the stand on his behalf. But again, I think it's the lies that got him into trouble. What do you make of it?
Yeah, it's always a lie, not the crime. I was still shocked by it. You know, for me, anytime a defendant takes a stand, I know that they're putting themselves in a better position. He testified brilliantly. You know, at the end of the day, look, I defer to the wisdom of the jury. On this one, I just disagree. I thought he did enough to prove that, to bring down the element of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm a little bit surprised. I'm actually very surprised, but yeah, man, it is what it is. That's a tough. The raging storm going through his mind right now. I cannot even imagine it.
Yeah, that's what I always think too, Mike. When I see these guys sitting there, you know, knowing that basically their life is pretty much over as they knew it, and their freedom is basically going to be taken away for a very, very long time. But I got to disagree with you, Mike. I thought there was a tremendous amount of evidence. The two things that I think he couldn't get over were what were considered to be, at least by the ME, were strangle marks, significant strangle marks and bruises around her neck, which suggested strangulation. And then also his decision to lie, Mike. He told the officers that their relationship was fine. Didn't mention at all that he was having an affair. Now, you could say that's something maybe he chose not to mention for other reasons. But again, the lies just didn't make sense. And that's what pointed the finger at him. And then the evidence sort of backed that up.
The only pushback I had was just the fact that they had to prove every element beyond a reasonable doubt. Hey, what you just said is why the jury convicted him. And so clearly, you know, 12 men and women agreed with you. On this one, the way he testified and the lack of any other evidence, just to me, was it. The strangulation marks, you know, there was explanation. They had witnesses. They had experts. They combated that. But yeah. If this was a civil case, I think he should be found responsible. But guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, yeah, that's a tough one. But it's done. It is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. And again, family members came in and said the wife had been sick leading up to the days where he says he found her dead. But again, not enough for this jury of 12, as you mentioned, Mike. All right, Mike, stand by.